Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm Lucinda. I am a doctor. Just for proof, this is me in my scrubs in the emergency department a couple of weeks ago. Not looking too tired. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, I think, when I took that photo. This is me looking slightly fresher. I promise you I'm not lost. I am supposed to be at a mobile conference. I'm much more used to the medical type. We get better t-shirts here. I've never been given a backpack before either. That was a real turn up. But actually, my main job day to day is not spent in the emergency department. It's as what we call a clinical product manager at Google, as part of the Google Health product area. So I thought, before we get into the weeds of what I've learned about leadership and what it means to lead as a product manager, actually, I don't know if any of you have ever met a clinical product manager before, and I thought it might be good to do the kind of 5-minute introduction to both my career and what that even means. So I qualified a few years ago now and started work as what we call a junior doctor in the NHS, which basically means anyone who's not kind of a super specialist. And I'm going to admit this quietly, but at that time, I didn't care at all about mobile technology. I did not care about IT. My mobile phone did what I needed it to do, which was predominantly a mixture of WhatsApp, FaceTime, and Candy Crush, embarrassingly. But it really didn't feel to me like it played a big role in my everyday life. And then I started work. And when most people think about kind of technology in healthcare, this is the kind of thing that they're thinking about. And this is a picture from an NHS hospital. So, big screens, big lights, sort of cutting edge of medical technology. But actually, when you're a junior doctor, the day-to-day reality of sort of information sharing in the NHS looks a lot more like this. This is also a recent photo taken in an NHS hospital. You've got, there's no patient notes here, so don't worry about that, but there's all sorts of forms that you have to fill out on paper and sort of slot into some big stack of a folder. We've got a record of serious incidents from 2010 to 2013 shoved in there somewhere. Yeah, not looking quite so modern anymore. And I guess this is what it felt a bit like for me. So at the top, you've got pages. These things down in this bottom corner we call a cow, which is a computer on wheels. A lot of these ones are missing their screens, which is also pretty common. And so I started work and went from kind of not really caring about IT at all to facing this kind of Groundhog Day reality of trying to find one of these computers, log into it, which was literally at times a 10-minute process, watching it churn like kind of 1999 broadband or something, letting it crash, finding another one that had got some battery, and so the process goes on. And I found that actually a lot of what I was trying to remember was not about how I looked after my patients, but it was what are the half a dozen passwords that I need to log into 10, 20 different systems to try and piece together a patient's history. And patients would routinely come into the emergency department and they'd say to me, well, can't you just look at my record? And I'd have to tell them that actually there is no such thing as a single record, even with a unified NHS. And if I wanted to get hold of some of the details we were talking about, I was going to have to use a fax machine to get hold of their GP, and we would have to deal with things that way. And actually, I pretty quickly became fed up with IT. And the fact that it wasn't my stethoscope that I showed you in the first picture that was my kind of primary tool, but it was WhatsApp. And around that time, some colleagues of mine from university decided to start a company called Forward, which, if any of you are from Mokido, will be pretty familiar to you, and you might be able to spot some familiar faces down in the bottom corner. And Forward's now a successful medical messaging application. And I kind of just jumped in for the ride, thinking, I guess, perhaps naively, that I could somehow contribute to this effort. And I, as you do in an early startup, I wore a number of different hats, from information governance to clinical safety, and somehow found myself as a highly enthusiastic but totally unqualified product manager. I don't think I even knew what that was. And in fact, I think it was Mike Hensock, who you can see in the middle, who kind of gave me that job title. So credit to Mike. And really, I learned a lot through that, through the process of being at Forward, and realized actually that product management was somewhere where I could really have an impact in healthcare. And earlier this year, I joined DeepMind, the Google AI research lab, to work on a product there called Streams. And 2 weeks ago, my entire health team joined what's now called Google Health, which I'll forgive you if you haven't heard of it, because neither is most of Google, which is a brand new product area within Google, which is going to be, well, we are focusing on health research, health initiatives, and products for both healthcare for consumers and healthcare for providers. Streams probably doesn't look like something many of you have worked on. Let me see if I can, yeah. So essentially, the problem that we are trying to solve, and it's being used in a couple of hospitals now in London, is how do you get all of that information from these tens of different systems into one place and allow doctors to see that and respond in time? So what it does is it pulls together information like your blood test results, your X-ray reports, your vital signs, your heart rate and things like that, and it generates bespoke alerts which are sent straight to the clinicians looking after those patients. The aim being that the top red line is kind of the current systems. You can see the desktops and the pages as part of that, and actually you can reduce the time it takes to get the right clinician to the right patient if you're clever about how you send them these alerts. So, I'm actually not here to tell you what it takes to be an excellent Google product manager, because I have by no means mastered it. I've been in this game for only a very few years. But I have come at it from a slightly unusual angle, which has meant I've had a very steep and at times bumpy learning curve. And I kind of wanted to share some of that with you today, in the hopes that if there's anyone else in the audience who's thinking about switching into either product or project management, and they're kind of early on in their career, that perhaps this will be helpful. And for the rest of you, you can enjoy listening to the mistakes that I've made along the way. And I'm going to throw in a few kind of medical anecdotes as well. And so stick with me on this one. I think servant leadership is a lot like practicing medicine. And so what are my lessons? We'll run through these quickly and then we'll go over them in more detail. Number 1, it's not all on you. Number 2, admit your mistakes early. Number 3, reflection is critical and retrospectives are key. Number 4, you're going to have to make decisions that people don't like and get over it. And number 5, you're not the most experienced, but you are going to have to take the lead. So let's start with number 1. It's not all on you, really. You would have thought, coming into software development from a medical background, where my work was frequently and literally life and death, I might have gained some perspective about what was really important and what wasn't. But it turns out those life lessons don't extend across. And I had to relearn all over again in product management what it meant to kind of share the burden of that work. One of the first releases that I was ever responsible for at Forward, and I'm sure Greg at the front will remember, was probably the biggest release that I have ever managed to date. Perhaps foolishly, it included both a significant database migration and a relaunch of half of the front end of the app based upon a redesign. And I can still remember the date that we did it, and I think I always will, like it was the birth of my first child. It was the 2nd of July. And I really kind of put pressure upon myself to make that release a success. Not only did I want it to be on time, as we always do, but I wanted to launch a really great experience for our users. We were migrating medical data, so the database migration needed to be perfect. I wanted it to be bug-free, and I think really it came down to I was putting a huge amount of pressure on myself because I wanted to prove to the team and to everyone else that I was capable of of doing this job. And so I did what we all do, which is take that pressure and apply it to the engineering team to deliver me a test build on time, which to their credit they did, though obviously not free of bugs. And I kind of took that upon myself as my problem to solve. So I took that build home and I spent most of a night testing it and trying to decide how I was going to justify that we would release it on time, but with the bugs that it did have. And I kind of couldn't do it, and I didn't sleep very well. And I went into work the next day, and I had a very excited team waiting for me to tell them that we were going to go ahead with this release. And actually, I couldn't do it. And to my relief, they were all totally on board with the idea that we pushed something out, I think it ended up being 4 days later, but that was actually a really great release, rather than rushing ahead. And what I realized was, when you have these big decisions to make that aren't just going to affect you, and they aren't even just going to affect the users, but other parts of the business, involving them in that decision is the right thing to do, because then everybody is on board when things aren't delivered on time or however things come. And so it's not all on you. Okay, admit your mistakes early. When I was making these slides, it took me about 10 seconds to come up with this list of mistakes, and we probably could have come up with 5 slides worth of lists of mistakes pretty quickly. Oh, you can't see it. There we go. I'm sure you'll recognize some of these, and I'm not going to read them out to you, but mistakes I've made included not realizing that the build was going to cause the users to be forced to update in the middle of their working day at a hospital, which is pretty annoying. Adding tasks to full sprints, not being strict about my definition of what sprint ready was, allowing planning to become a refinement session. The list kind of goes on, and we will all make them, and we will all continue to make mistakes. And I'm not going to ever stand up here and say, don't make mistakes, because that's an inhuman thing to do. But I think the trick really is to recognize your mistakes and then start shouting about them early. And the problem with that is that it can be quite painful to do, and it can be quite embarrassing, particularly when you're supposed to be leading your team. And so to try and ease some of your embarrassment, I'm going to tell you about one of the most embarrassing mistakes I ever made at the hospital, in the hope that next time you need to admit to a mistake, you can think about me and not feel so silly. So let's have a drink of water before this one. About a year ago, I was working in the emergency department, and I saw a relatively elderly gentleman, I think he was in his early 70s, who had come in, walked into the department with some right hip pain. It was pretty severe. He'd been taking some medication at home. It wasn't really helping, but he'd walked in, so I wasn't necessarily too worried about him. Went and saw him, took his history, examined his right hip. We requested an X-ray anyway, because he was a little bit older. I requested a right hip X-ray. I sent him round to the X-ray department. 15 or so minutes later, he comes back round to me. I managed to log in and pull his X-ray up on the computer, and it looks fine. He's got a bit of arthritis. He's in his 70s. There's certainly nothing that's making me worried. There's no breaks. And so we have a little chat, and I send him on his way. I'm feeling pretty good about that. Taken me not very long, got him out of the department. About a week later, I got a tap on my shoulder from one of my bosses, asking me if I remembered this patient, and I did. And at that point, they asked me if I remembered that he'd had right hip pain, which I also did. And then we logged into the computer system and pulled up the X-ray of his left hip. And whilst I'd requested a right hip X-ray, I had very happily just looked at a picture of his left hip and sent him on his way. Now, fortunately, all's well that ends well, but I had to call the patient and admit that I didn't know my left and right. And I'm still not very good at my left and right to this day, but I do now always double check. So next time you make a mistake, you can remember that one and hopefully feel a little bit better about yourself. So in the theme of making mistakes, my third point would be that reflection is critical, and retrospectives are key to doing this. I think this is one area that medicine has got right, in that reflection is a really important part of professional development. Regardless of how small or big your mistake is, even just reflecting on your kind of day-to-day practice is seen as an important part of the profession. And I think that's something that as product and project managers, we could do with kind of incorporating more into our day-to-day practice as well as into these kind of formal retrospective meetings. I think the problem is that running a successful retro is actually really difficult. There's a lot of things to consider. Where are your team? Are you even co-located? A lot of the time when I was working with Mobiconf, I would be sat in an office in London with a poor speaker, and they would be over here, and you know, that makes the dynamics difficult. What's the power balance in your room? Do people feel comfortable speaking up, for example? So I'm gonna share one way of doing this that I really like, and maybe it's worth giving a go with your team. I really like to use post-it notes, as I think we all do. And I found that one of the best ways to get good comments out of my team is actually to let them write them down ahead of time, rather than kind of putting them on the spot in the room, particularly when you've got a mixture of junior and senior people. So what this picture is trying to illustrate is the three colors. So we go pink or red for stop doing, green for start doing, and something neutral for do more of. And you can write, I give everyone sort of 5 minutes at the start. They can bring their ideas along ahead of time, and then we get them up on the wall, and they actually create discussion points rather than kind of sitting in the room and you know, the first person comes up with a couple of ideas, and then we all kind of agree and move on from there. But as well as getting your team to share their ideas, I think the main lesson I've learned is that the worst kind of retro is one where nothing changes afterwards. So I think as a leader in the team, you need to make it your job to make sure that something changes. And the only way I've been able to make this work is to be super aggressive about clear action points, clear responsibility, and clear review dates for them. If you don't put a review date on an action point, it never changes, or at least your team never recognizes that it changes, in which case you might as well not have a retrospective. It's a moaning session, and you can do that over lunch or something like that. Okay. This was a hard one for me, because I think a lot of us are people pleasers. You have to make decisions that people don't like. This is one way in which medicine's a lot easier than product management, because pretty much if you can keep the patient happy and maybe one or two of their relatives who usually want what the patient wants, you've done your job. Relatively easy. When you're a product or project manager, you are literally accountable to everyone. I was trying to think, and I got designers, engineers, SRE, your boss, your product team, your user, your partner, the executives in your business, marketing and comms, legal. Everybody sort of wants a piece of you. And the outcome of that is you are never going, and if anybody else has managed to do this, let me know how, you are never going to make them all happy and all totally happy at exactly the same time. And so I don't think it's even worth trying. On the occasions where I have tried to do this, it usually means you are stretching the truth, and then you disappoint people because you don't deliver what you said you'd deliver, and then nobody feels good about that. And so I had to start to come up with strategies for how I was going to manage these situations, particularly when it's somebody more senior than you that's not particularly happy with what you're doing, and about how you're going to, you know, when your gut's telling you one thing and your executive leadership team are telling you they've got some other goal, how are you going to make that decision, and how are you going to justify to them what you're going to do? And the question that I asked myself is this one, which I've got up on the screen. What do I need to know to feel confident in this decision? And when I was thinking about, you know, what's the answer to this, it really comes down to three things. Do we have clarity on our goals within the product team? And that could just be you or you and the designers. Do we have a clear justification for our roadmap? Do we understand why we're doing what we're doing? And as part of that, do we agree on when we would divert from that roadmap? What's a big enough swing in our metrics? What's a significant enough change that we think it's worth doing something that isn't actually on our roadmap? And within Google, the way that we think about this is through the kind of lens of product excellence. And this is such a big topic that I think it would be worth a talk in its own right. So I'm just going to skim over the details of it. But product excellence is a culture, but really it's a set of principles which is helping the entire cross-functional team, so from product, UX, engineering, build products that are user-focused. And it kind of focuses around 3 ideas: focused utility, do we understand what we're trying to get them to do with this? Simple design, and crafted execution. And I think the easiest, is that the word? The best way to kind of align these three principles and to help align the product team is through something that we would call a critical user journey. And it's a critical user journey is essentially a user journey through your product. It can exist, or it can be something that you're heading towards. And you pick a maximum of 5 for perhaps the quarter, or perhaps a longer period than that. We sort of work in a 6-month kind of time frame at the moment. And all a critical user journey is a person, a role, a goal, and you break that goal down into the tasks it would take that person to complete that goal. And you pick your 3, 4, or 5, and that is your focus. And then you can always ask yourself, when you're asked to make a decision, does what I'm being asked to do improve that critical user journey for our users? And if it doesn't, why are we doing it? And I think having that kind of process of defining those critical user journeys and agreeing upon them as a product and engineering team, and then being able to come back to them is particularly helpful when you have to make those kind of difficult product decisions. So my final one is this. It's kind of the simplest. You're not the most experienced, but you do have to take the lead. At some point, you have to just bite the bullet. I think coming as a doctor to product management, I knew in a health tech environment, I offered some unique perspectives, but I still frequently feel, I guess, like a bit of an imposter for my lack of computer science knowledge. And I think one of the biggest mistakes, coming back to point 2, that I made in at least the first 6 to 12 months of being a product manager was to kind of lean on that lack of computer science and defer my decisions to everyone else. So if there was a technical decision to be made, I would either seek as much advice as I could from as many experts as I thought I could, or I would, more often than not, kind of defer the decision to the technical team. The same sort of applied for running Agile meetings. When I first started, Agile was sort of, to me, about flexibility more than anything else. It certainly wasn't a way of doing software development. And so I would allow our project manager, Mike, to run most of the meetings. And actually, in the beginning, for the first month or so, that was a helpful thing to do. I learned a lot. I gathered mentors around me. I learned about Agile. I learned about some of the technical decisions we have to make. But there comes a point where actually your team needs you to do the leading. They need to see you have confidence in yourself. They need to see you have confidence in their ability to do this work. And essentially, you have to take the leap. How you do that, I don't think there's one straightforward answer. But I think it comes down to this. We all bring different, unique skills to our teams. That's why we're there. You have to appreciate that within your team, you do have different types of experience. You do have different professional qualifications and skills. But you also have different sets of responsibilities, and your responsibility is to be a leader. So identify your unique skills and work with them. And you can always ask for help from your team along the way. So, coming back to my 5. Number 1, it's not all on you. Admit your mistakes early. Retrospectives are key. You're going to make decisions people don't like, and you've got to take the lead. I hope that was helpful. If anyone's got any questions, please let me know.